Hello and welcome to Arts and Entertainment.
With Chris and Randall.
I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
And welcome to the show. As always, if you're new to the show, please like, subscribe, comment. If you're old to the show, please like, subscribe, comment, and share. We always want to know, hey, are we doing a good job? Some ideas about maybe what we could do better, or you got a great idea you'd like us to see? Well, hey, just reach out to us. So, Randall, what's the best way to reach out?
Well, first of all, check out our website, chrisandrandall.com. There's different ways to find us there. Our Facebook page is pretty popular, Arts and Entertainment with Chris and Randall. We're both on Facebook. Yeah, so you can email us, whatever.
Cool. Again, the quality of our show just is always impacted by what you're thinking. So feel free. We just want to hear what you got to say. All right, Randall, what are we doing today?
Okay, Chris, do you remember we did an episode on Rock and Rule, which was a big animated epic that no one ever heard about?
Yeah, that's true, with a killer soundtrack.
It's funny because I started telling people what that episode was about, and they were like, Rock and Rule, what's that? No one ever heard of this movie, Chris. But anyway, so we did this episode on Rock and Rule, and there was this little animation company in Canada, Nelvana, that made that movie. They made the 10-minute animated sequence for the Star Wars Holiday Special in, was it 1977?
78.
78, and that...
I'm an old man, I know these things.
And that was the animated sequence that introduced the world to Boba Fett. Now, Chris, do you remember as a kid playing with Star... Did you have Star Wars toys as a kid?
Yeah, I mean, you got to remember I was like 42 when the movie came out.
Oh, my God.
No, I was, when that movie came out, I was a teenager. So, yes.
Oh, okay.
I did not have like a lot of action figures of Star Wars.
Well, I was younger than you.
What we would calling. So I did think it was cool. I did not own a Boba Fett. I didn't really own any. I had a couple. I went big on that Planet of the Apes, but I certainly thought Boba Fett was cool.
Right. Everybody thought Boba Fett was cool.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I had a lot. Star Wars toys were a big part of my childhood. So Boba Fett was like probably the most popular action figure. I don't even think that's an exaggeration. I mean, everybody loved Boba Fett. I mean, everybody wanted to play with Boba Fett. No one knew anything about Boba Fett, by the way. But so when we did the show on Rock and Rule, I started wondering about where did Boba Fett come from, right? Because why would this very popular character, or did this popular? I started wondering wondering if this popular character came out of Nelvana's studios and not Lucas's brain. And I started doing research on it, and I kind of think that maybe. And we're going to go into it, right, Chris? But I kind of think that maybe Boba Fett was like a community creation of all these different
collaboration.
people.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I joined you on that deep dive, and unlike say Luke Skywalker, which is a pure product, Luke Skywalker is George Lucas, isn't he?
Right. So almost all, yeah.
So in a weird way, you're right. Like almost everything else in Star Wars is either a wish fulfillment of George Lucas, a variation of George Lucas, or George just stealing stuff from stuff he used to watch as a kid.
He stole a lot from the Dune novels, I want to say.
Among other things.
Yeah, but he has a lot of influences. But, I mean, Lucas, to Lucas's credit, you could tell he's a giant science fiction fan. I mean, he is drawn, for Star Wars, he drew from many sources. It's obvious he was a fan. It's obvious he read all the stuff, Let me start by reading. I'm going to read this excerpt from Star Wars Insider from 1995. Okay, so this is really interesting to me. This is from an article about how Nelvana came to make the Star Wars holiday special. Okay, here's the quote. Nelvana Studios in Toronto, Canada is the only animation company Lucasfilm has ever entrusted with Star Wars. They came to Lucasfilm via Canadian director David Akamba, who helped develop the Star Wars Holiday Special for television. Akamba showed Lucas Nelvana's 1976 special, A Cosmic Christmas, their first animated half-hour show and their first big success. Lucas loved it, and they were invited to participate. In early 1978, Nelvana co-founder Clive Smith came to Lucasfilm and presented a detailed visual presentation for an 11-minute animated piece to be included in the Star Wars Holiday Special, which was shaping into a $1 million primetime opus. At the time, George Lucas was riding a tidal wave of hype following the phenomenal success of Star Wars. Making a presentation to the President of the United States probably would have been less intimidating. Clive sweated out his 45-minute talk to resounding silence. When he was done, there was not so much as a murmur to indicate reaction from Lucas and his creative staff. Then suddenly everyone broke out into applause. "Good," said George as he walked up to congratulate Clive. Much to the chagrin of several bigger, more experienced firms, Clive's bold young animation company was about to embark on the difficult task of introducing the Star Wars saga to the medium of animation. Lucas then turned to the storyboard and, like a surgeon, succinctly pointed out 2 weak points in the storyline. Clive remembers George offered quick, polite, and sound advice on how to correct the problems. Clive was impressed. He knew there were a few areas that needed to be resolved, and Lucas had zeroed in on them. Clive remembers, George really knew his business. He knew exactly what he was doing. Clive notes that futuristic science fiction before Star Wars invariably presented us with pristine worlds made of clear plexiglass bubbles with no trace of dirt or defects. George, this is a quote, George gave us beaten up old Chevy-like stuff full of believable grunge. That was something we attempted to carry through in the special and the series. The most exciting aspect to Nelvana's short piece was introducing a new character to the Star Wars universe, Boba Fett. Nelvana styled the character exclusively from early Joe Johnston sketches and a crude home videotape of an ILM employee lumbering around in his backyard testing the half-finished bounty hunter's costume. Okay, so Chris, does that sound like George Lucas invented Boba Fett?
Well,
it doesn't sound like that, right?
Say that because I looked on Wikipedia. I found a citation. I did not bother to look up the citation, but it says, and this is where we have a really interesting mystery going on.
Right.
George Lucas created Boba Fett in April 1978 draft of The Empire Strikes Back, basing the character on Sergio Leone's The Man with No Name, played by Clint Eastwood. We will get to that later, I promise. The character needed to be designed quickly, as Lucas had agreed for him to be featured in the Star Wars Holiday Special later that year. The character's design stemmed from the initial concept for Darth Vader, who was originally conceived as a rogue bounty hunter. While Vader became less a mercenary and more of a Dark Knight, the bounty hunter concept remained, and Fett became an equally villainous but less conspicuous character. Concept artist Ralph McQuarrie influenced Fett's design, which was finalized by and is credit to Joe Johnston. Joe Johnston, by the way, directed Captain America, the First Adventure. So.
Okay, so it's really interesting in that. Okay, so let me just skip ahead because Star Wars Insider has another article. I had to really I had to go in a deep dive to find Star Wars Insider article.
This took up a lot of our free time, folks.
So Star Wars Insider 2004. So this is years later. Let's see. We're going ahead almost nine years later. So they've quoted Clive Smith again, and this time Clive Smith says he remembers being bloody thrilled about the opportunity to work on the Star Wars short. Quote, "It was a great project, and Lucas was really, really good to work with. He gave us a script, something like a 10-page outline that was called The Story of the Faithful Wookie." That's the title, by the way, of the short. "Then Frank Nissen, my right-hand animator friend, visualizer, and co-director in those days, and I worked like crazy, and I think in about 10 days we did the entire storyboard. I don't know how many panels it would have been, but it was a very detailed board, and I took that down to Lucasfilm." Now, you know, I don't know if the original article I don't know if they left that out or they didn't. I mean, because that makes it sound like George Lucas pretty much wrote The Faithful Wookie, and then, and pretty much, so he pretty much wrote the first incarnation of Boba Fett.
Well, it gets even weirder because Frank Nissen who you just mentioned, who did the two-dimensional sketch, not the animated sketch. It's really important, but the draft for Nelvana. He was an Nelvana employee. He says, so Clive Smith, we just talked about him. He told Star Wars Insider in 2016 that he had only 2 weeks to finish all the storyboards and character designs. With him presumably in charge of framing a rough idea of poses, how was the process working with him? Do you recall any feedback from either director, Steve Binder, who finished the job, and David Akomba, who had creative differences and left mid-production? Clive was the only director I worked with. This is Frank Nissen. No feedback from the live-action people. I pick up my Boba Fett scenes in sequence, and we talk over what is needed to be done in that meeting. I get Clive's thoughts, and then I would make my suggestions for how I thought Boba would act. Oh, I'm sorry, this is not Frank Nissen. This is John Celestri, who is the animator. We're talking about the animator now, John Celestri. So John says, Clive was the only director I worked with. No feedback from the live action people. That means George Lucas. I pick up my Boba Fett scenes in sequence, and we talk over what was needed to be done. In that meeting, I'd get Clive's thoughts, and then I'd make my suggestions for how I thought Boba would act, gesture in scene. Then I'd get back to my drawing board and work out my thumbnails to plan out the scenes, and then animate. We did not have the luxury of doing rough pencil tests, so all my animation was cleaned up in between and shot as final pencil test to make sure there was no screw-ups before going ink to paint. So Neeson did the model sheets for Boba Fett. Celestri did the animation. Celestri is kind of the one who decides that Boba Fett should kind of walk in a slow and mannered way.
Okay, I just
like
right.
a dark, like a cowboy villain, you know?
Right.
Like Eastwood.
He had a lot of freedom, and he used that freedom well. I just want to say before we go on that with the two different accounts I read from Star Wars Insider. So the first account, it talks about how Clive goes in and he gives a 45-minute presentation to Lucas and company about what they're going to do. And it also says that Lucas knew about a Cosmic Christmas. Now, Nelvana created a Cosmic Christmas from scratch. You know, that was not based on anything. They wrote it. They created all the characters.
Yeah.
So Nelvana is obviously a company that can make content. They're not like a animation for hire kind of company.
Yeah.
They can just totally make content.
Yeah.
So it makes sense to me that they would make some kind of presentation and they'd go into Lucasfilm and give that presentation. And he says it was 45 minutes long.
Yeah.
And they were waiting for the to see if they're approved or not. That sounds like, Chris, you correct me if I'm wrong. That sounds to me like they are presenting an original idea.
Well, look at what Celestri says. Celestri, the animator, says, I was given no guidance as to how to animate Boba Fett. No notes or description of traits, etc. The animated performance was all mine off the top of my head, and we didn't have much time to experiment.
Right. So if there was a 10-page outline from George Lucas, he could have used that, right?
And like everybody, whether it's Lucas, Celestri, everybody, whether they're at Nelvana or their work or there's George Lucas, they're all claiming Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name. Did you notice that?
Right.
Everybody's saying the same. They're all saying the same thing as if that was the original idea. Just like, oh yeah, Darth Vader was originally going to be. So I think let's be clean and let's break it down. I think there's the idea of the character, and then there's the final conceptualization of the character and the aesthetic of the character and the content of the character. So we know that I would say Lucas having the idea of having Darth Vader as a bounty hunter, switching him over to a knight. I definitely think Lucas really loved the idea of bounty hunters. I think.
Okay, but before you go on, Chris, let me ask you one question.
Sure.
Do you believe there was a 10-page outline from Lucas for a Faithful Wookie, or do you believe Nelvana made the whole thing themselves? Because I tend to believe Nelvana was inspired by the other creators who already had worked on Boba Fett as a character, and they created the Faithful Wookie story themselves. That's what I'm inclined to believe. And I don't. And the 10-page outline is, it's something they've made up so that Lucasfilm can retain the rights to the whole project. I mean, what do you think?
Years ago, I read a very long interview with Lawrence Kasdan on the making of Indiana Jones. And no, it wasn't Indiana. It was Indiana Jones. And Kasdan talks about working with Lucas. And he said that Lucas really just gave him pages of notes and script changes and dialogue. It was really, and he said, he said to Lucas, like, why don't you take some screen credit? And he's like, no, you're the screenwriter. I'm just the director. But Kasdan really felt like working with Lucas, that Lucas is a very hands-on guy. He really will think things through very thoroughly. So I think what we're really seeing here is an argument between aesthetic and look, George Lucas is not an animator. And for that matter, he's not much of a costume designer. George Lucas, I honestly think is a writer. I think we can say he's a director for sure, but I think he's also a writer. And I think as a writer, I can relate that he has an idea for a character and he's thinking about the things you cannot see, which is, oh, I'd like him to have a code. I'd like him to be cool. But on a aesthetic level, and again, there is a, we can maybe show this if you're looking at this on Facebook, on YouTube. But if you look at the drawings, just Google the drawings, what was presented, what was all white originally, it was influenced by Mobius.
Right. But you believe the 10-page outline existed, and but you don't believe it was, but perhaps it wasn't like a detailed storyline. It was like just a bunch of notes.
In my research, it says it was Lucas who specifically requested that Nelvana design the look of the cartoon in the style of the French artist Jean Girard, aka Mobius, whose work could be seen in the Heavy Metal magazine.
Okay, well maybe there was a 10-page outline then. Maybe I'm being too cynical about this.
The direction and black and white home movie shows a person wearing Boba Fett's prototype costume was basically all the clues Nelvana had to work with. So all the colors for the production come from following Mobius' sense of color. In Boba's case, blue was the base color. All the other color models and basic designs had to be okayed by Lucas before production of the cartoon proceeded. So if you ever look at the original drawing of the Hulk, where he's gray, or if you ever look at the original Superman costume or the original Batman costume, there's a big line between the rough versions of costumes and the final draft. And I'll be honest, if you really do look at Boba Fett as he looks, even in the animation, the final copies, it's still another leap to the film. So we'll get to that in a moment. So I think a lot is going on here. You want to talk about Mobius, just to explain to the audience what we're talking about here?
Sure, but I just want to establish so you believe Lucas pretty much came up with Boba Fett then in his 10-page outline for a Faithful Wookie?
I think that Lucas came up with the characteristics, not the movements, not the gestures, but the POV that makes the character. Because I think Lucas is always
the greatest bounty hunter in the galaxy. What do they call him?
That is something. Yeah, I mean, I think that's something.
That's Lucas.
He always wanted to have a bounty hunter. That's just something he's always wanted. He wanted a bounty hunter. He wanted somebody. Did he say he wanted someone like the Sergio Leone movie, the guy that we're just talking about?
Man with no name.
The man with no name. Is it possible because these guys are all roughly the same age and there's a trilogy, so everybody's into the man with no name? So that's just kind of the collective consciousness of all the creators? Probably. I don't really think it's worth arguing who decided to base it on the name with no name. I just think that if I'm not a painter, I'm not an artist. And if I was George Lucas and you were a painter or an artist, and I said, Randall, I got an idea for a hero, and he's a bounty hunter, and he's really good at being a bounty hunter. And hey, here's Jack Kirby. I want you to look at Jack Kirby art because I see his costume as something Kirby-esque. You'd look at Jack Kirby's art, wouldn't you? And you kind of find like what makes Kirby so iconic.
You're making something.
And then you play around with it in your own words.
You're making something really click for me now because that whole idea, the Clint Eastwood character, the man with no name, what was it? A Fistful of Dollars he was in, and
Fistful. There's three movies. Yeah, A Fistful of Dollars. I forgot them now.
so I mean, that's really making it click for me because those movies are big at the time.
Yeah.
So it makes total sense that Lucas would just want another character like that in Star Wars, because Lucas loves to draw from other sources. And just and so there you go. He wanted a character like that.
Well,
And
apparently he wanted Darth Vader to be a bounty hunter, and then he gave that up, but he still liked the idea of bounty hunters.
right.
I will say this much, and now we can get into the man with no name. So this trilogy of this guy who's hired to come into towns and clean it up, who you can see his face, but the hat covers his face quite a bit. He doesn't say that many words. He wears a poncho. He smokes a cigar. He moves deliberately with great gestures. He's a master gunfighter. He has like almost a superhuman ability with the gun. All of that was taken from Akira Kurosawa's two films about a Ronin samurai, Yojimbo, and the sequel, Sanjiro. And here's how I know, because Akira Kurosawa sued Sergio Leone and won. And samurais really influenced Star Wars. There's a film by Akira Kurosawa called Hidden Fortress that is, many people believe, where they get the idea for R2D2 and C3PO. A lot of Hidden Fortress you really see in Star Wars A New Hope. Some of the Seventh Samurai you see in Star Wars. There's a lot, I mean, there's a very Asiatic quality. There's an Orientalism to
Well, yeah,
Darth
for sure.
Vader.
For sure. Well, the Force,
The sword fighting is far more indicative of a samurai film and the code of the Bushido than it is ever about a Western.
right, and there's the whole idea behind the Force. It's very much Eastern mysticism. It's
Yes.
Zen.
Is.
It's sort of a adaptation of Zen for a Western audience, or Buddhism maybe.
So that really is at the root. And again, when you really are dealing with Lucas with so many influences. Now, what makes Mobius so different than what was, so in visually speaking, in the first Star Wars movies, you really only have, I would argue, three kinds of costumes, right? You have the Empire, which is kind of a mix of a European 19th century empire, or even early 20th century kind of fascistic black, solid black, very well tailored suits, kind of like space Nazis, for lack of a better word. Then you have got stormtroopers who look kind of like knights, again in clean white. And then you've got Darth Vader, who's kind of a combination of a knight, a dark knight, a little bit of the samurai influence, I would say, with the cape and maybe the way his costume is done. But, basically very clean lines, everything is clean, right? Clean lines, lots of clean lines. The Empire is, if nothing, very clean lined, right? Clean geometric shapes, two tones, really maybe a little bit of gray, but mostly what? Black and white, no ambiguity. And then you have everybody else who seems to just be wearing crap, right? They look like they came from a hippie commune, right? Like the last tailor died 50 years ago, and this is all they got, It's just kind of like stuff, as we say in Yiddish, schmatas. They put Obi-Wan Kenobi in a robe, and that becomes emblematic there. Moving forward, I thought about it this morning. Obi-Wan wears a robe and a little bit of khaki brown. Luke, because he's a farmer, wears quite a bit of khaki brown or cream white, kind of like he looks like a judo. What do you call that in judo? He's wearing like when you karate, a gi. So
Yeah, all the Jedi look like that, sort of.
But then after that, all the Jedi always look like that, and it's kind of just like loose fitting, nondescript earth tone.
Well, it's Asiatic.
Yeah, but it's not. There's no design. It's pretty boring. It's boring. It's so boring. So you go to Mobius, and Mobius's influences are actually quite interesting, because if you look at Mobius's art, you can definitely see he's a Frenchman, and he has a love of medieval styles. A lot of medievalism you can find in his work. A lot of his stuff looks Byzantine from the late 9th century. It looks almost influenced by Persia of the 7th century. You see a lot of older cultures. You see conical hats people tend to have weapons that are some kind of a spear or a sword or something, that is part of the decoration. The clothes fit not so tight, but they do have a line to them. There's more of a bulk to them. They look distressed, but at the same time, they have character. Wouldn't you say that's how you would describe?
Yeah, I mean, Mobius was highly influential during that era. There's a lot of detail in Mobius's drawings. He pays a lot of attention to fashion. Mobius really wants different characters to be wearing different types of fashion. The one live action movie that really captures Mobius' style well is perhaps The Fifth Element, which was heavily influenced by Mobius' style. But yeah, I mean, Mobius is unique,
Did you ever see on HBO the Ridley Scott series Raised by Wolves?
Oh yeah, I've seen Raised by Wolves.
You can see that there's a lot of Mobius influence there too.
Yeah, so they really Lucas really wanted the Faithful Wookie to look Mobius like.
Yeah, right, and it's nice because it does set him apart. And when there's this idea that, well, if he's blue or gray, it almost so morally means he's not the man in black like Darth Vader, and he's not the hero in white. In the moral compass, he's kind of in a neutral space.
Well,
Right?
another great thing about Boba Fett is that he is high tech. He's super high tech. I mean, you could argue that about Darth Vader, but Darth Vader's tech is there to keep him alive, and he doesn't pop it out. But Boba Fett is like an Inspector Gadget like character. He's got like all sorts of gadgets all over him, and he can break them out at any time.
But his gadgets are distressed. They're used. They're worn. You know what I'm saying? Unlike the Empire, where everything is clean and state of the art and pretty, there's something
Right.
very blue collar.
Right. Fett gives the impression that maybe he used to be a stormtrooper, and maybe he's collected different gadgets and weapons from all over the universe, through his travels, and he uses everything, and he's a practical, like you're saying, he's a practical guy. He's a working class guy, It's like he wants results. He's results oriented, right?
Yeah, so nothing goes to waste. That's why his slave one, which is a crazy name for a ship, they're changing that. But
I don't know why
small,
it's called Slave One.
compact. It stands upright because it makes more sense. There's not a lot of room. Everything in it has purpose. I also think about the fact that in the Westerns, that the cowboy of the 1870s would often wear like old Union Army jackets or old Confederate pants to show that in the past life they had been a member of one of those two armies, and now they've gone Ronin, right? Like
Right.
Yojimbo. These are all, whether it's a man with no name, it's Yojimbo, or these are guns for hire, right? These are guns for hire. These are men who possess professional training, but they've gone solo. It's interesting too, because Han Solo is an anti-hero. Han Solo has a lot in common with Boba Fett. Actually, technically, they both worked for Django. No, they both worked for, no, sorry. Try that again. They both worked for
Jabba.
Jabba, because they're both men for hire. They're both anti-heroes. But the difference between Boba and Han is that Han, to our knowledge, has never been part of the military. Han is all emotion, no control, no discipline. Han lets it all hangs out. Han has his trusty gun, which he's very good with, but no armor, right? He's just keeping it loose, keeping it casual. I mean, Han is really the dude. He's another like anti-hero, but his great ability isn't that he won't work for anybody, but he's in a kind of a way he's a little too lazy to work for anybody for very long.
Well, Han Solo is the bad guy that goes good, right? He redeems himself. That's the whole idea behind Han Solo. But Boba Fett is just he never goes good. He's not bad either, though, right? He's just a man doing a job, and he will work for whoever hires him. And by the way, Han says that same thing. They're both anti-heroes. It's just that I think Han has an excess of emotion, and I think Boba has an excess of discipline. Well, let's go into the timeline because you really came up with the timeline of his creation. Because I'll just briefly go over it because it just shows how many hands seem to have shaped Boba Fett. So first of all, Ralph McQuarrie makes a sketch of
Right.
Boba Fett,
Before he did all of the original Star Wars character sketches,
and
including mercenary Darth Vader. I've seen it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh
Well,
yeah, Bounty Hunter Vader. I mean, you take a look if you can at the really early McQuarrie sketches when they didn't know what they're going to do with Star Wars, because there was a lot of different ways they were exploring the look of the costumes.
well, let me ask you though. Do you think McQuarrie, when he originally makes the Fett sketch, does he have any input from Lucas, or does he just come up with one? I mean, what?
Well,
Where do you?
Lucas had said about Luke Skywalker that he's the grandson of Buck Rogers or the grandson of Flash Gordon. And one of the things that, if you look at the McQuarrie sketches, I used to have the book of McQuarrie art from the original Star Wars, is that they're very much influenced by the futurism of the 1930s Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers. So when you look at Boba Fett, you do see, the character, the Rocketeer.
Yes.
So there's a similarity, you know what I'm saying? There's something very jet age. There's something very 1930s about the helmet and the jetpack and the lines and the stylization. So I think McQuarrie was the one who first saw Boba Fett as being a character you could have drawn or seen in a 1930s Buck Rogers comic.
Okay, so you think McQuarrie comes up with the original idea? He's thinking of aping those styles because that's what they're trying to do at that
But that's
time.
a clean lines guy. That's
Right.
not distressed guy. That's not beaten up. That's just a clean lines guy.
Right, but then here's where it gets fascinating because Joe Johnston, right? He took that sketch and he made an actual costume in real life
Yeah.
for Boba Fett,
Yeah.
and that's on the video that a lot of people have seen. I mean, I'll link to it, but it's called what is it? Meet Boba Fett, I think, and it comes
Yeah.
out
And Joe
after Star
Johnston,
Wars.
when he was working on Captain America and reintroduced Captain America to his own world, he put the distressed shield front and center on the poster. He could have made a bright and shiny shield, but if you look at the costume, first there's like three different costumes in Captain America. There's like the early World War II costume, which looks very put together. There's the costume when he's performing on stage, which is completely like 1940s glitz. But the shield, he really goes out of his way to make it look like this is a shield that has been put to work pretty hard in World War II. So Johnson has always been someone kind of like Lucas, who likes, the old broken down grungy Chevy.
Okay, and I think according to lore, so the Meet Boba Fett video comes out, and according to lore, like this is after Star Wars is already a big hit, and according to they see this video on TV, I think, and according to lore, like all the Star Wars fans love Boba Fett, and they can't wait to see more Boba Fett. And this is when Lucas is making the Star Wars Holiday Special, and this is allegedly when Lucas makes his 10-page outline, and he gives it to Frank Nissen of Nelvana, who is going to make the storyboards for the Faithful Wookie. And he makes the storyboards, and then they get approved, and then that's when John Silvestri, one of the head animators at Nelvana, helps to like really make him visually, and he really draws from Mobius. And if you look at
And to be clear, I had a friend who worked for Nelvana in the 80s. And in the 80s, the belief was over at Nelvana that was Celestri. They're pretty much all on board. Celestri was the guy that came up with a look.
Okay. So what's interesting, though, is that they really draw from Mobius, influenced by Mobius when they make the Faithful Wookie. So you can see that when you go from the video, Meet Boba Fett, to Faithful Wookie, you can see that Mobius influence. They've really distressed him, and they've really, made... Oh, and Lucas has probably helped with giving him Man with No Name quality, and they're really... I mean, it's like all these people are helping to flesh out this character. and then,
you haven't even got... Oh, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, and then... they want to... Boba Fett is very popular at this point, so they want to put him in Empire Strikes Back, and I guess he gets a tiny little role eventually.
Hold on, but who designs the Boba Fett?
It was Norman
costume?
Reynolds, the costume designer, right, for Empire. So Norman Reynolds, you can see, like, has taken the ideas from the Faithful Wookie, and he's he's made them even more lifelike, right? I mean,
Well, it
how would
says
you how would you
Reynolds worked in the art department, and originally the armor was originally designed for what was called the Super Troopers, and it was adapted for Fett as the script developed. Originally, it was prior to, this is where it gets a little confusing. Prior to, this is actually kind of interesting. So before Nelvana got to work, all the men we mentioned, Nissen, Celestri, the original version as it was conceived of, because it was just black and white, was that Fett's armor was supposed to be all white. But when it came back from the animators, they went with a much more subdued color scheme to visually place him between white armored and rank and file Imperial stormtroopers and Vader, who wears black. So the difference between the animated Boba Fett you just mentioned and the one that shows up in the movie is that they go more from blue to gray, and the gray is used to show that he has a gray morality. And the armor was designed to appear to me now look like it's been scavenged from multiple sources and adorned with trophies.
you're now talking about Reynolds' contribution, right?
Right. This is Reynolds' contribution. So there's a lot of speculations. So because there's a lot of speculation about Fett's origins, we don't really know when we see him. We know that he served in an army, and we know that he's gotten these scars, and that's it. And in that sense, because it's a little bit dirtier than even the one from the Nelvana people, he is kind of exactly like Clint Eastwood looks, with the poncho and the hat and the boots in The Man with the Nose Name series, or the way that Mufuni's face is all kind of messed up and his robe is all kind of, again, there's that sense that this is a man who is not young, right? This is a man he's known battle. He's taken a beating and he's come out. And so that's the cinematic version of Boba Fett we meet.
Right. And so we have no less than 6 people that we know about that contributed to Boba Fett. Well,
absolutely right. We're not even talking about voice actors.
Right. Well, you know what? Faithful Wookie, the voice actor for Fett in Faithful Wookie was amazing, right? I mean, that was have you watched it lately, Chris?
No.
The Faithful. Oh, well, it was. He did a great job. I mean, that voice actor is amazing. But yeah, I'll just read the list again. There's like no less than 6 people, maybe more, that we don't know about. Ralph McQuarrie, Joe Johnston, George Lucas, Frank Nissen, John Silvestri, Norman Reynolds. I mean, all these guys contributed to Boba Fett, who, I don't know, arguably might be the most popular character in Star Wars. I don't know.
Yeah, and you're really onto something, because both the voice actor in the animation and in the film were told to be Eastwood-esque. You know, the voice is low. He
was very much Eastwood-esque in the Faithful Wookie. I want to say that okay, we'll get to my last part of this, right? Is like so I wanted to argue, and this is the sense I got when I first started looking into this. The sense I got is that maybe Lucas isn't happy with Boba Fett because he didn't make Boba Fett. So Lucas keeps trying to kill off Boba Fett all the time. So, like, for instance, Return of the Jedi, Boba Fett is hardly in Return of the Jedi, you know. And I remember as a kid, I don't know if you remember this, Chris, but I remember as a kid watching Return of the Jedi, and you see Boba Fett, and you're like, yay, Boba Fett. Now we get to see some Boba Fett. And then, boom, Lucas kills him, like, like in 1 minute. What's that about, Chris? And then, you know, in the prequels, of course, you know, he does a little origin story for Boba Fett, shows Boba Fett's dad. I guess all the clones come from Boba Fett, and then, or Boba Fett's dad, and Boba Fett's a clone, and, you know, it's a whole thing. And then he kills off Boba Fett's dad right away, and, you know, Boba Fett's a little kid, and it's sad, and I don't know, it's like Lucas, I feel like Lucas has a real problem with Boba Fett. And then, you know, I've read also that, in like the Clone Wars animated show, he didn't want Boba Fett in it. Of course, he didn't want any of the star characters in it either, but he finally allows Boba Fett, you know, and Filoni is able to flesh out the whole Mandalorian thing. And now, you know, when Lucas finally sells Star Wars, you know, they make a show. They're going to make 2 shows now, maybe 3, about the Mandalorians and Boba Fett, one of the most popular characters of Star Wars, and that may not have happened if Lucas had kept the property, because this is not Lucas's baby, right? I mean, I feel like Lucas has like this subconscious or maybe totally conscious, like like displeasure and with Boba Fett. It's not his baby, is what I'm saying. This is like Boba Fett is a character that comes out of this community that Lucas built, and everybody loved him, and he can't claim credit. I mean, what do you think about all this, Chris?
I think it's quite possible that Boba Fett has as many lives or more than Emperor Palpatine. Just can't keep a good character down. Not in the Star Wars world. He embodies what is the Western elements of Star Wars movies. He embodies the Eastern elements. He has an iconicism that's all his own. The Mandalorian is a wonderful spin-off in the Boba Fett world without aping Boba Fett. I really look forward to Book of Boba Fett when that comes out next year. I think you're right. I think, to me, I've never been a big fan of the magical elements of Star Wars. I vastly prefer, spies, the pilots, anything that is normal. So for me, the mercenary bounty hunter stuff, the cowboy stuff that is Boba Fett and the Mandalorian just really works.
Yeah,
and I do love the designs. I just love that kind of knight armor look. It's quite beautiful.
Yeah, that first season of The Mandalorian, that it was such a revelation. I mean, no more Jedi, no more Force. It's like we're just going headfirst into the Star Wars universe, and we don't have to deal with any of the invisible part of the universe, right?
Yeah, none of the crazy super stuff. He's kind of like Batman. He's of us, doing the best he can with his basic human being skills or Mandalorian skills, and I think that makes him much more relatable. And he's a middle-aged guy, kind of like me, so it also makes him much more relatable. That's pretty much the way I see it. Wow, this is a great episode. I really appreciate you unpacking all this Mandalorian.
Yeah, you know what? I didn't know I would find so much information about Boba Fett before I started reading about this. I had to go dig up the Star Wars insiders and see what they were saying, and yeah, I mean, and I don't think anybody's ever put this Boba Fett timeline together like us, Chris. So we could pat ourselves on the back for being the world's foremost Fett historians.
That's great. You can take this for college credit. All right. Well, I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
May the Force be with you.
Goodbye. Bye.